Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Welcome back to the Mastering Profit Through People Masterclass series for 2024, with this whole series based on a people focus, and it's brought to you by Profit Master Global Outsourcing. In case you're not sure who I am, my name is Paul Jansz, and it is our pleasure to have you with us today. Now, if you're joining us for the first time, just a little bit about mastering profit through people and how this was created. It probably started a couple of years ago when the CEO, Richard Croaker, and I sat down for, probably call it a 6-part podcast series. And we did that over the last 2 years. And that was called Talking Numbers, our Talking Numbers Mastering Profit series. And that was very popular with what we had done. So we thought, you know what, let's raise the bar and let's do it in a live sense. So this whole series, which is a monthly masterclass, and I've got different guests every single month, is all going to be about people. And I know doing some of the focus groups that I've done over the last couple of months, I think the number 1, 2, and probably the third challenge for every business out there at the moment is people. So whether that is how you recruit them, how you induct them, how you retain them, how you performance manage them, how you maybe performance manage them out of the business. There's a number of different aspects in here. But I'm a massive believer on, if you want to grow a business, we need people to be able to do that. And we need people to be able to service that. And that's going to be the premise of everything we talk about today with our subject of people-led growth. Now, before I introduce you to our guests, let me share a little bit about Profit Master Global Outsourcing if you're not quite sure who they are. So Profit Master provides you the opportunity to grow your remote-based team with an extension to your current onshore team. They're based in the Philippines, and Profit Master can help with quality people at whatever level you want them to be at. Just knowing some of the numbers, and this might prick a few years up as well and say, well, maybe I do need to talk to these guys if you're not already using it. But this is where you can increase your productivity by 20% and you can decrease your costs by 40%. Now, you do the maths on that and you work out whether or not it's worth having the conversation depending on the role that you're looking for. I know a lot of us nowadays do work remotely, and that's what's going to be a fantastic thing as I share how Jamie Beresford had actually led his team as well, and how he's market focused, and the way that he's got his team set up are actually quite phenomenal. So I'm looking forward to jumping in and sharing all of that as well. Let's go to that as I introduce you to these guys that you can see on screen already. So I have the pleasure of having these two powerhouse CEOs with me today. I've got Richard Croaker, CEO and founder of Profit Master Global. Rich, how are you?
Very well, thanks, Paul. Just got back here, just landed from at Melbourne, actually. And
you're in Melbourne.
Yeah.
We were with each other yesterday, so it's exactly right. And JB Beresford, how are you, mate?
I'm great.
You were traveling all over the place, so it's always great to have you here.
Yeah, I'm in an office today, so all ready.
Fantastic. It's good to have you guys here. Now, let me just quickly paint a picture for everybody that is joining us in that, the topic we're talking about today is people-led growth. Having coached a number of accounting firms and been involved with financial service firms as well, I haven't met too many firms, businesses that don't want to grow, whether that's growing the top line or growing the bottom line. You still want to grow, but that can only happen with quality people that we need to be able to help service our businesses and our customers. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So Practice Protect, which is the business that Jamie runs, they've got 25,000 plus users. I'm not going to steal anything away from Jamie, what he'll share as well, but 25,000 plus users across Australia and the United States, which is interesting in itself. But his teams, he's got a team of 50 plus in the Philippines and 30 plus in South Africa. So we're going to delve a little bit deeper in with Jamie to how he's been able to set this strategy, and then how he's been able to grow to have the market share that he has right now with Practice Protect, which is quite amazing. Richard, on the other hand, done very similar things in terms of his growth. And Profit Master, he's been able to grow now Profit Master to more than 100 plus people. They're based in the Philippines. And again, a very interesting model. Got a small team here in Australia, but the majority of his team are in the Philippines. So how have they both done that? That's what we're going to dig into right today over the next hour or so. To any of you guys that have got questions throughout the session, please drop them into the Q&A. If you want to have a chat, there's the chat bar as well there. I'll moderate any sort of questions, and I know we've got time for that as we get closer to the 1 hour mark. We've got 54 minutes to go. Let's kick off. So our topic of people-led growth. let's start with that. Jamie, mate, and I mentioned it just before, team of 50 in the Philippines and another team of 30 in South Africa. So your two key markets being the United States and Australia. And just talking offline there, we were talking a little bit about the US market. Tell me about your strategy. Let's go back to when you first put this together and the strategy behind that to say, right, I'm going to be, let's say, for example, based in Australia, and you're going to have two teams located elsewhere to grow those two key markets. Talk me through that.
Yep, sure. Well, yeah, we were an IT managed services business operating out of Brisbane. I think we had about 6 staff at the time. And I just sort of looked at the future and looked at how was I going to scale this business? Like, how many clients did I need to get for every staff member I needed to hire? And it just didn't make sense. And I thought to myself, well, I can either spin my wheels here. I just had my first child in my early 30s. I can either spin my wheels here and, just death by out, or I can, it just doesn't make sense, or I'll go and try something crazy. And if it doesn't work, I'll go and do something else, because I just didn't see a future in the scalability of my business operating like every other managed service provider in Australia. So I packed my bags with my wife and my 1-year-old, got away from the mother-in-law, and headed across to the Philippines and did a pretty tough. I lived over there for 4 years. The first 2 years were really tough. We did things the hard way. And learned a lot of lessons the hard way. And we just sort of went over there with a small business Australian mindset and went ahead. Do you want me to dive into some of those early lessons?
Yeah, for sure, mate. That's a great part about, taking people through those. And we're going to talk about some of the expensive lessons, let's call it. They're learning experiences, I suppose, but that's call it the investment back into what you've done as well to get you to where you are today.
Yeah. Well, the mindset we went, we had like every typical Australian small business, we had this sort of jack of all trades approach. People joined the team and you just figured out what needed to be done on the day. We're a bunch of, fairly small team. Took that approach across and thought that I could just extend global team members into that logic, and it failed miserably. I think one of the things that got us was the role titles are the same over there, and it didn't work like that. Probably the quickest thing we learned that it's about tasks, not roles. Rather than sort of adding more of the same role, it was about, okay, let's look at these team members in Australia. What's the bottom 20% of the tasks that are taking probably quite a lot of their time? And let's go through with a broom and sweep all of those out of those roles and create a position description and make that a role. And that started to work. That's probably was our first, took us about a year to figure that one out. So that tasks, not roles. One of the things, when someone asked me, like, when they apply that logic to the Philippines, like, really get granular about what you're going to work with in the Philippines.
That's a great thought process, because it takes me back to when I read a book by the old CEO of GE back then. He used to talk about the bottom 20%. And that triggered straight away for me to think, if you're thinking task, and yes, everyone online can also think about that in terms of what's that bottom 20% now. And I think no disrespect to the new breed of younger people, we're a little bit older. Well, I'm older than you anyway, but that new breed coming through, that they don't want to do those tasks either, to be fair.
No, they don't.
So it's a great opportunity to say, well, how can I get that done? How can they step up? And that's probably the conversations that I know I've had with other firms that are considering this is, yes, how can you get them to step up to do high level work, which means if they can charge more, obviously they can earn more. If they can earn more, the business, everyone wins. But you can also then have your lower level tasks, that bottom 20%, which I do love the theory around that.
Yeah, and I think that. Yeah, sorry, I'll let you keep going, Paul.
No, you go.
Yeah, so probably the biggest thing we learned was as well, taking that Australian mindset. The way to sort of engaging team members is sort of build career growth. I just want to, salary progression rather than career progression. Okay, at the end of the day, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you probably tell I'm trying to be careful how I say this, but Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's about brass tacks. Okay, and sort of promising somebody a future and growth and all of these things that may happen one day in the future. That's not as meaningful as giving people a clear pathway to to how they can increase their salary in the short term. And when you look at salaries wherever it is globally, it's a very personal thing to people. Everybody wants to increase their salary, and your salaries only go up. Okay. And as a business owner, you know, a salary's fixed. You can't, you know, if somebody falls off the wagon or goes quiet for a few months and is disengaged for whatever reason, you don't get any of that money back. But the trap we fell into is not getting really clear on what we were tying that salary progression to. Okay. And that is where maths came into it and KPIs. And it took us ages to get those KPIs right. Okay. But a lot of businesses, when you're in Australia, right, people, you know, it's just a different mindset to work. And you don't need to get as granular about your expectations of what you want from your team members. And we found that it was just about, the challenge was getting really specific about what outcomes or what we wanted people to achieve and how we would link that and when specifically to a salary increase, and getting clear, rather than the old way of doing a salary review was like, you sit down and go, yeah, you've been pretty good. You're probably worth, you know, you're on 70, you're probably worth 80, and I'll just give you an extra 10 grand, and you shake hands and everyone's go to lunch. We had to get a lot more granular about when we did that increase, what do we actually want from that, and tying a forwards momentum to that.
Brilliant. Again, a great little lesson there. Rich, have you got anything else that you'd like to add to any of that, mate?
No, I agree. I agree with what Jamie's saying. As we get further into this discussion, one of the things that I learned very early on in the piece, amongst other things, but in this particular area, is that salary is important to everybody, but it's what comes alongside that salary that becomes not as important, but you know, it's certainly very important. So what somebody has in what I'm calling, and I've seen around the internet, an emotional salary, not just a financial salary. The things that make them come to work and enjoy coming to work are very important, particularly with younger people. And you know, I'm older than you, so I'm definitely older than Jamie. But our average age of staff over there is probably 25 or 26 years of age, and it's a completely different mindset to the way I went through at the start of my career. So that's one aspect, and the other thing is career development. That took me a long time to work out as well. In somewhere like the Philippines, where they're working for companies in Australia, it's very easy for the company in Australia to just think that, oh, they'll keep churning out the same thing time and time and time and time and time again. They think that it's just a machine that that keeps on working, and that's a dangerous thing to get into, because like Australians, these are young professionals, ambitious people who want to be able to get ahead. So helping them build a career path and understand what that career path looks like is very important for not only their satisfaction, but ultimately that becomes the longevity of being able to keep the staff member as well. Yeah. And the other thing also, I'm probably not as well developed as in what Jamie said about really tying pay increases to targets that the staff are required to achieve. I'm probably not as in tune as Jamie might be, but what I'd say in my defence is that all of our staff work for individual clients. So the objective from our point of view is to work closely with the client, and from the point of view of the client is to work closely with the client to actually work out what those KPIs and the metrics should look like. In fact, I was talking about this yesterday, that within our service agreements, we actually have a clause there relating to KPIs and other metrics. But when you actually start with the client, they usually don't have those metrics in place. And it's when they start working with our operations team leaders that they start to understand how important these things are. And if you start to get it working, you know, just in little bites, it starts to come together over time.
No, it's good.
That's my add in. Yeah.
And not easy. I do see a lot of people around that sort of make out KPIs as super simple, because they, you know, I can jump in if you called it on how we sort of went about that journey, but it took us a long time to get that right.
No, please do.
And can I also add is the buy-in from the client. The client has to buy into that concept.
Absolutely.
And what Jamie said about, you give an 8,000 increase and an extra 10, that's the easy way. That doesn't fix that issue.
Yeah.
And I think the lesson here as well is, and we used to do this a lot with our coaching. And I know, Jamie, you mentioned it before as well, in terms of call it the performance reviews. And, most firms still go with a 12-month performance review, which then ends up with the salary review. And the time that's involved in doing all of that, when you're dealing with, 3 partner firms, 20, 30, 40 people, astronomical in time. Okay, so how proactive could you be, and based on your thought process there, and sitting down and mapping out what does their future look like, and based on their KPIs, what sort of return could they get if they can do this? That's something you can do onshore, offshore. It doesn't really matter, but it's a conversation that, again, they're striving for something. If they strive for that and they can achieve that, well, they get that. But you know what? The business wins just as much.
Absolutely. And so laborious, like doing team reviews is something, when you're busy servicing your clients, it's just a distraction and it's painful.
Yep.
But it's so important because, typically what happens is you sit down and you've sort of got some notes, and you sit down with someone and you go, oh yeah, I was happy with this, I wasn't happy with this. And here's you're not really giving it as much attention. You're probably sitting there thinking about your next client or anything. And look, we all think about where the money comes from. And I tell my team members all the time, when our client won't call us back or whatever, it's like, yeah, well, we're not exactly front of mind for them. They're worrying about who's paying them so they can pay us. That's just the mindset we're in as professionals. But it is, taking that time and really getting serious about those reviews and getting a system in place so they aren't so laborious was really, really important, and an area where we fell down. And look, I'm pretty sure I could probably, if you want me to dig in, I could probably tell you where that's got to after 10 years. But yeah, you've got to prioritize your reviews and making sure that they're meaningful and connected to metrics, connected to numbers. You're not just pulling this discretionary number out of your backside. Yep. Because you haven't prepared properly.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I know, for example, you mentioned before as well the time that you went to the Philippines initially, but I also know, you spent a number of years in Bali. Now you're back in Australia on the northern New South Wales. So you've been doing this. You've been running this large team that you've got remotely yourself. So having those systems and being very clear on how you're doing that, that's a part of your winning formula, isn't it?
Well, it's our business. We're globe hackers. We're a tech company, and that's our skill set. But ultimately, our point of difference as a business is hacking the globe.
There you go. Okay, good. So, guys, here's an interesting one I'm going to talk about. In terms of, let's call it conflict resolution. Again, we'll go back to the chat just before on KPIs, performance management. How do you manage that? Jamie, maybe you can kick off, and then Rich can come in as well. So there's some key things around there, because I know when you're dealing with that remotely, that makes it a little bit harder as well.
Yeah, and it does take it, like getting your metrics visible is really important, and figuring out what you actually want from each particular role takes time. It took us a long time, but from a logic perspective, we've got every role has 4 KPIs, 4 different metrics that we track. And my business is, I can see that most people on this are accounting firms, because I know most of the people or some of the people on the list. Our business is obviously different, so we have different metrics and KPIs. But ultimately, we figured out that have 4 KPIs. It's the same for an individual and same for the team that they're a part of. Okay. And they kind of triangulate against each other. So one potentially would be, say, NPS, or customer feedback. That's going to triangulate against speed of completion, because if someone's working too fast, they might make mistakes, and the client's going to get shits and give you a bad score. So you're sort of managing those, again, making sure that there's no way that to gamify them. And that was something that got us a bit as well, because you make a game out of it, you make maths out of it. Yeah. Everyone's going to play the game. Not everyone, but there's always going to be that 1 in 10. So 4 different metrics, and a score for each of them out of 5.
Okay.
4 other metrics that were tied specifically to each 4 of our values, and that's where you get to use your discretion a bit. So one of our win-win, being that's one of our values about being fair and kind. There was a time when old mate didn't turn up when he knew it was going to be a busy day and he let his team members down a bit. You can use those. They're a little bit more discretionary than maths.
Yep.
The score out of 5 for each one of those 8, that all totals to a specific score. That specific score is then total to a specific percentage increase on the salary, depending on where that score is.
Right.
And working through all of that, handing that over to someone means no discretion. It's not like, oh, well, you just don't like me and this person got a better score. You gave them a bigger increase than me. It just takes all of the discretion out of it. And you should be doing that onshore as well. Like the learnings, the things we were forced to do in PH and now subsequently SA, we do it in Australia now, and having that system in place, it makes your reviews not as laborious and not as like, oh, shit, what, how am I going to sort of approach this meeting? You've just got a structure to follow, and it's just it's a piece of paper.
And I suppose if you're growing and you're adding team members to your team, and that is an upfront conversation that you're having with them, well, there's no secret chatter behind the door, behind the water cooler. You're actually upfront and saying, this is how we're going to do this. This is what you can achieve. These are the KPIs. Here's the framework to work within. And you can even have that discussion right up front, even in the interview stage, if that's what you wanted to do.
Oh, absolutely. Show them in the onboarding process. This is how you're being met. These are your KPIs, and it's a number that's very visible. Getting them visible is easier said than done. And there's plenty of reporting applications in the accounting space, Atani, etc., that would that can make, because getting your metrics clean and visible is really important as well, and not easy.
Yeah, good. Rich, any comments to that?
Look, the way that we handle our conflict resolution is we certainly have a defined process within the organisation. It doesn't matter whether it's the onshore business or the offshore business. It is a defined process for conflict resolution. The one thing that I read time and time again is that transparency of your expectations is extremely important. And many accountants actually find it hard to do that. They find it hard to define what their expectations are, particularly in the smaller firms. They know what they want to achieve out of their business, but when it comes to their people management, they find it a lot more difficult. And part of that is due to time, but also partly due to experience, because accounting practitioners practice accountancy. They're not very good HR operators in general. And it's not until the firm gets a little bit larger that they start to think about those things as a part of the bigger picture of how the business is being managed. The other thing that we certainly have is we have defined employment expectations right from the start. So we have a very detailed employment manual. And, I look at what we have over in the Philippines compared to our employment manual here in Australia. And our employment manual in the Philippines goes right down to that granular level that we expect from the performance of our staff, and it defines what the consequences are if those are failed. And the other thing that we have it's not just the stick; it's also the carrot. So when something goes wrong, as it will inevitably be, and it does create conflict, well, it's looking at, well, what are the consequences of that mistake? How do we fix it, and what's happening going forward? In the Philippines, we do reduce things down to a number, very similar to what Jamie's talking about in terms of our employee expectations. But in Australia, that's a lot harder to do. And I look at the partners in our accountancy practice here, and when we come up to review time and salary review time, it's already been where we would like it to be a really objective decision about how the person has performed over time. And I'm including conflict as well. We would love it to be a really objective process, but inevitably its subjectiveness comes into it, and you've got different views between different partners and things like that. So it's not an easy thing to do, but it takes time. One of the things that I would just say about what we've been able to achieve in the Philippines in relation to performance measurement, setting the KPIs, conflict resolution, and so on, is that we actually have onshore Filipino managers who work that for us. And that's one of the unique differences for us compared to some of the other smaller businesses where our managers are all Filipino. They've all had international experience, but they're all Filipino. So our operations managers have a role in that. Our HR manager has a role in that, and so on and so forth. So from my point of view, it's not an issue that I have to deal with as a partner or a CEO. It's dealt with in the organisation, and it's defined what they actually have to do and how to achieve it.
And I think having those Filipino managers, Richard, they can have so much of a better conversation. Even to this day, after 10 years, I can't have the conversation that local managers have. And I wish, I lived there, right? I went and moved there. It took us 2 years to get ROI, and probably a bit longer. Like that's probably optimistic. I tried to sort of, do it myself and save money. Didn't want to listen to the profit masters of the world. And hearing if I had had all of that in place at the start, that 2+ years probably would have been a few months.
Yeah,
having that support.
You were talking earlier about the mistakes that you made, and I had actually spoken to other BPOs before we actually had feet on the ground. And it was one of the comments that they were able to make is to use, where possible, use local management. And it was a decision that from the start, and I believe it was a very good decision, and it's certainly paying dividends now.
Absolutely, and having that already in place. Management is relatively difficult in the Philippines. Finding managers is hard anywhere, but PH most specifically, and they've got a lot of options. They're pretty choosy about working, and if you're a 5-person business, it's going to be pretty tricky to attract a really attractive manager in terms of the skill set. So being part of something bigger, who's already got that management in place, you're just going to skip that first point.
Yeah, the other thing I'd just say about that, in general, is one of the advantages of having local managers, and it doesn't matter whether you're here or over there, but one of the things I found by having local managers is specifically the Philippines, but I expect other jurisdictions as well. The Philippines is an administrative nightmare to work. And when you're a foreigner, it is increasing. It's exponentially more difficult. But if you get good managers, they understand how to maneuver through that administrative environment, and things get done where, if I tried to do them as a foreigner, it would be extremely difficult to get done.
It's interesting, isn't it? And I think that's the great part about, Jamie, you mentioned it before, knowing to the people like the profit masters, or if people are having to have difficult conversations with some team members, there are good companies out there that can help you. As an example, the first show that we did here last month, we had Jenna Paulin talking about HR and all the little things that people need to know. Now, people that running their business, they're usually the technician, the entrepreneur running their business. They don't have HR experience, as you mentioned before, but go and work with experts that are in that field, so you don't actually get yourself into trouble. We only had an experience with someone only 3 weeks ago. Firm called me, was a little bit unsure. I said, look, this is my take on it, but I prefer to get some advice on it. When I got the advice, it was the same as what my take was. Now it was different to what they had done. You can get yourself into a lot of trouble pretty quickly by doing the wrong thing when you can actually just get some good quality advice out there. Now that didn't even cost anything. I rang Jenna, I said, hey, heads up, this is what I want to know. Am I wrong or right? And she goes, no, you're 100% right. Right. And we went down that road. So reach out to the people that are around you. And that's what these things are. You've got great people around you to provide you with some great advice. So guys, talk me through, and Jamie, you mentioned this before in terms of, again, other learning experiences. We'll call it learning experience or investment of learning experiences. What are some of the things that went wrong that you can share with everybody online from your point of view, and even Richard's early on, the sort of mistakes not to make?
Yeah. I mentioned the salary progression versus career progression, tasks, not roles. Probably another thing is, we try and get our team members to buy in to the company, and that happens sometimes over time. And you have that, in PH, I'd say that 1 in 5 that really does buy in. But as a general rule, I hate to say it, and I hope this is too controversial, At the end of the day, you're just a foreigner and in a completely different world to them, to PhD members. They have a much more collective mindset, and we're an individualistic country, as we know. We operate ourselves. We've got siblings, we might lend them money sometimes, but at the end of the day, we're all sort of here for us and our own immediate family. It's a much more collective mindset in PH, and ultimately their loyalty is first and foremost for whatever those uncles, brothers, sisters are wanting and saying. And we just had to accept that it is a sort of and dare I say it, at the start, not always, but had to take a little bit more of a transactional mindset to those team members. It wasn't like, where you become a bunch of mates and you sort of hang out, because you're not even in the same. It's not just a cultural thing. You're not seeing them every day. You're not building that personal relationship and buying into the company and the culture. And that's where we had to get clear on our KPIs, expectations, and take a more sort of no different to how a large company would operate.
Yes,
I guess, we had to adopt a sort of a large company mindset, even though at the time we were a sort of a 15-person business.
Interesting. That's great advice. Again, the three that you've given there have just been awesome, and hopefully people are taking notes, and that can add to people's strategy as they move forward. We're sitting here nearly April at the moment, and we'll be soon into a new financial year and greater planning. Rich, what about your thoughts?
Oh, look, right from the start, I tell anybody who wants to hear my initial story that I did not know what BPO meant when I started over there. And for those who are online that still don't know, it stands for Business Process Outsourcing. But I honestly didn't know what it meant. So I went in green. The fortunate thing that I did have was that I had connections to a very good lawyer, and also to a very good accounting firm, and they were able to give me the assistance that I needed to make the right decisions to get underway. And the other thing was, you talk about that transactional relationship. One of the things that I found when I first started was that we actually had a call center team. And call center people are very particular about how their metrics work, and they want to know the really deep details of how they're performing, because that's how they measure their incomes as they go along. And I found that it was very early in our place, and we didn't have that in place. The ability to monitor those numbers we didn't have in place in the very early days. So consequently, we had a very high turnover of staff in the call center area. I eventually made the decision to get out of the call center business because honestly, it's so competitive, and I can make more money providing accountants than I do providing call center agents. But that was another thing, learning about it. The other thing was the culture of the people. I actually, as one of our pillars of our culture, we talk about loyalty, and I'll vary slightly with what Jamie says, but the culture over there is loyalty to God, loyalty to family, and then after that, it'll be loyalty to friends and to the company and the friends and the people like that.
That's a good way to put it.
We spent a lot of effort.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry.
I'd swap God for church.
Yeah, well, I put that in there too. On our application forms, we can actually ask the religion of the person who's proposing to join us. You can't do that here in Australia. So anyway, a lot of time goes into building culture, and the culture, the building that culture starts before they even start work with us. We want to know through our recruitment processes that they're not only capable of doing what they say they can do, but also that they're going to suit the culture of joining us, and then they'll suit the culture of the client as well. That, of course, these are things that in the end of the day, they help to add to longevity. The other thing over there, I mean, just because you're dealing with a completely different system to what we have in Australia, anybody who wants to go over there and start a business, they will pay the school fees for the first couple of years. You are going to learn and you're going to pay. And, it just depends on how many mistakes you learn as to how much that's going to cost you. It's a difficult place to work when you first start off, and until you start to understand the way of the world over there and the people who you can trust and who you can't.
Or you can bypass all of that and use an organisation like Profit Master.
Oh, thanks, Jamie. That's exactly right.
So, guys, let's get into one of the when I talk to professional services firms, whether that be accountants or financial advisors, it doesn't really matter. But one of the critical things that they tell me is data protection, and it's probably the number one as far as trusting the process, trusting the source. How do we know that if we're setting up remote teams, whether it be the Philippines or South Africa, and I know that's what you do, Jamie, but we'll come to that. How can we make sure that the data is protected? So, Rich, I might throw to you on this one first. With 100+ people, how did you initially set up the business? And was there I'll call it a critical framework that you had to make sure was in place? And has that changed over time?
Look, we did start with a framework, and it was a very good framework. Everybody's working inside behind firewalls and everything like that. So for what we had 10 years ago, it was a reasonable security platform that we had. As you know, and as Jamie knows, last 2 years ago, we spent a lot of money upgrading our systems to really bring them into the new world of expectations in relation to data security. I don't want to take anything from Jamie's area, but ISO 27001, for example, working internationally, you need to be working with somebody that understands what they're doing in that realm, that they have the platform in place to cover off the requirements of that. And while Jamie said talk to somebody who's been through the experience, such as Profit Master, it's one of the arguments that I use for people who want to directly work with a company from Australia to work with an individual working from home, because that individual usually won't have the level of security that is required just to meet the Australian requirements in relation to information security. And that's where for example, why we work with Jamie. And, it was, you might remember in our conference last year, Jonathan Martin was speaking not only about ISO 27001, but we've also got some things that are happening here in Australia. I don't think they've come directly into force yet, but I'm sure Jamie will have something to do with that. And then also the monitoring systems that we have. So they're what we've built up. So to answer the question, it's very different from what it started out to be. And what it is now, we've had people come and look at our systems, not only clients beforehand, but, IT services have come and looked at our systems and said, hey, yeah, this is the model on how it should be run. And of course, that includes the Practice Protect product as well.
And does that mean, sorry, Jamie, before I throw to you, mate, does that mean people need to be a little bit more vigilant and I know I've obviously been to your office. I caught up with Jono last week in Melbourne, actually, Jamie. Good to see him.
Nice.
Yeah, he was at the accounting expo. Let's say, for example, Rich, I know being in your office and the security in your office that we did the tour of last year was outstanding. Firms that have got people working from home, what are the critical things that they may need to be aware of in that particular situation? Is it things like the internet? Is it, again, making sure they've got the right software to protect them and protect the data?
Mate, the world is full of people who want to take your information and do with what they want. And I mean, it starts, in terms of the data flow, it starts before it even hits your router, at home. So, there's all sorts of things that you need to be able to look at. And some of the controls that you're able to put in place are proactive and some are reactive. And, they're the sorts of things that you need to be looking at. If you're going to have your staff working from home, you need to understand the critical security implications that are going to occur as a result of working from home, right? Now, I'm not saying that people shouldn't work at home. My personal view is I like to see people in the office, but it's now time that we have to think about at least a hybrid model. So, you've got to consider those security implications from the get-go. And, it's not just Practice Protect, but things like we use a product that actually monitors everything that goes on click by click by click or screen by screen by screen within the business, And then we have flags that automatically poke up when there's something not working. One of the things that Jamie has is a geo fence so that the machine can't go out and work somewhere. You can't take the machine from the place where you've been approved to work and go and take that and run it in a cafe and think that you can go and work there while with everybody around you. They're the serious considerations that you have to think about, particularly when you're working in a foreign country. And, you know, I have to say that for many accounting firms that I see here in Australia where they've got staff working from home, those security levels that they would expect from a company like mine and staff like mine, they don't have them for their people here in Australia. You know?
So should they?
Oh, mate, I reckon Jamie should have 50 or 60,000 licenses out there or more.
Suppose I'll throw to you now, Jamie. What do you think, mate? What's your thoughts on all of
Yeah,
that?
look, obviously this is right in my wheelhouse. So I'll just sort of probably just share conceptually sort of how breaches happen and how hackers think, and that's probably a better way to start. Probably the number one thing is hackers don't hack, they trick. So a lot of people have this misconception that, oh, well, you know, people, these hackers, it's much harder for them to sit there trying to breach a firewall, or, you know, you have to be pretty technical and pretty smart to get through a firewall into a server systems that are protected by big software companies. The easiest way to get in is to trick somebody into divulging legitimate access. So trick someone into giving up a password, and that all happens through the device or email. Okay. Now, and that's where this work from home piece is a challenge because of the blending aspect of it. If someone's in their home, even if they're using a work device, at the end of the day, they're going to be in a home mindset and they're going to use that machine more. They're more likely to use that machine for home use, other things, and other family members or other people. So that risk of devices or endpoints being breached and then passwords and access being stolen through that device into your systems is where the challenge happens mostly with remote work. And you know, when that all started going into you know, really getting big during COVID, that was a huge amount of breaches and a huge amount of challenges that presented to us, and took our product offering down a different pathway, just as hackers and criminals started to expand how they went along. So hackers don't hack, they trick. That piece around blending devices at home, and also the devil's in the email. We have a lot of firms that perceive their most valuable data assets to be their practice management systems or their clients' Xero files. Those systems are pretty well protected these days. You know, Xero's got their multi-factor, and it's pretty hard to get into those systems themselves. Email is where it all happens, because once you get into someone's mailbox, you can impersonate them, you can research them, and ultimately what they're stealing is your trust between you and your client. They want us to find out who you pay money to or who you receive money from, so they can modify invoices and so forth. All of that's in your email. Going through someone's sent items, you can learn a lot about them, and that is really about protecting email, protecting your devices, especially if they're not in the office, and just understanding that aspect that really, cybersecurity is a human issue, not as much of a tech issue as people tend to think, because it's about the human and tricking them.
Yep, well said. And I know when we covered a fair bit of this last year on one of the masterclasses, we also spoke about the importance of the education of the people. So keep talking and educating your team members. And you said it before, they're the ones that are going to get tricked. They're not going to get hacked. So maybe add this to your list if you guys are listening to this and say, well, what sort of training or education or conversations do we have with our team members about potentially being tricked? Because I think that's a really important one. And how can I increase that if I need to? There's a lot of different, obviously, training organizations out there. I know we spoke with Fishnet last year. So there's a lot of different things out there, or companies out there, that can provide that layer if that's what you want as well. Because, and in this world, we know you've only got to look around the last 2 or 3 years and look at the data that's been hacked. And, you know, I think accountants and financial advisors are leading the way as well with the, you know, the amount of data that we hold.
Mm.
I'll just throw in a quick statistic for you. During the COVID period, there was a study done in the UK of bankers that went to work from home during the COVID period, and 40% of the machines that were being used at home were being used for purposes other than banking, and being used by persons other than the person that was authorised to use it.
Interesting.
Mm.
I had to think about that word again. You said bankers, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? Rich, let's talk about a big one that I want to touch on, and that is in this employee-led market, retention, I think, is a massive, massive one. And I think, talking to firms onshore in particular here in Australia, and, Jamie, you might even have some thoughts on this with how things work in the US as well. But, the ability to retain people is a massive one. What lessons can you share about how you can retain good people?
Yeah, look, I think,
Yep.
sorry, Richard.
No, you go.
I think all people really want is clarity. And I think I've made the mistake in the past of just not being clear enough about what I expect from people and what I'm thinking. People, like I said earlier, we all think about where the money comes from. We're thinking about our clients. Our team members are thinking about us and what we think of them, and not communicating enough and not being clear enough. You're leaving it to their imagination on where their role's going or what to think of them. Probably the number one, and it's pretty simple stuff to keep team members engaged. Yeah, you can take them to the pub and give them presents and things like that. That's all great. But at the end of the day, it's more important to people that they know where they stand with you, where your business is going, and don't feel like they're being kept in the dark.
It's a great lesson. Rich, what about you?
Yeah, look, not too different to Jamie, and this gets back to what I was talking about: emotional salary versus financial salary. What people get in, there's no doubt that financial salary is the first thing, but it's also the how they feel connected to the business, how they feel they're being treated in the business, how they respected in the business, and stuff like that. And I was jotting some notes down while I was on the plane coming back a little while ago. And I know that in our business, in not necessarily this order, but the workplace flexibility is really creeping in at the moment, and we're just having to deal with that. And it's not just in the Philippines, it's not just in Australia, it's all over the world. Workplace flexibility is an issue that contributes to the sense of well-being of a staff member. And I guess, some of that comes down to demonstrating trust. And, everybody wants to be trusted. The other thing is the training opportunities ranks very highly. We rank our training into personal development, professional development, and team building. And we have about 45 courses in our personal development thing, everything from business communication in Australia to how to learn to drive, because people in the Philippines, as they become more middle class, a lot of them are very bad drivers. So teaching them to drive. Then in our professional development courses, we're actually using Australian courses. So unlike some of our competitors who are using courses that they've developed in-house or using resources in the Philippines, we're actually using courses that are developed by chartered accountants, Australia, New Zealand, by the CPAs, by the Institute of Public Accountants. We also have some online basic tax training programs. We have training programs in mortgage broking, Cert 4 in mortgage broking, and we also do some stuff in financial planning as well. And one of the things that they see is that, hey, I'm getting an international flavour for the training that I'm being given here, and they people really work very well with that. So training and development, I think, ranks very highly. Also, demonstrable measures that help somebody understand what work-life balance. So, people don't want to just have a 9-to-5 job. They want some sort of flexibility in being able to balance that with other things that are happening in their life. And one of the easiest things to say is, oh, well, if I work from home, I can go and pick up the kids after school. Now, that's a really simplified thing of what I'm suggesting. I'm not necessarily saying or promoting that particular thing, But I know in our office, that if somebody's got to, got to leave early because their child's got a thing on at school or something, or got to take a parent to a doctor, you just create that flexibility. We're very particular that we don't want people working on weekends. They get their work done during the week. We have programs that if people have to work overtime, that we facilitate them to be able to take leave in lieu or something like that. Also promotion of wellness. So this has creeped into the whole employment feeling is, I want to see how you provide wellness in our company that I'm going to go and work for. One of the ones that's particularly creeped in is mental wellness. And we all know of some of the difficulties in the accounting profession, particularly the audit profession, that have occurred over the last couple of years. I've actually had first-hand experience in my accounting company where serious issues relating to mental wellness of people working beyond their, what they should be working. That's certainly creeping into the employment view. Things like, as you know, in the office, we've got a cafeteria over there, providing rest areas. We actually have transport shuttles that pick up people and take them home again at the end of the day. Wellness campaign. So I know, Jamie, if you're aware, but in Clark there was a fun run over there. Actually, I think it's this week. No, it wouldn't be this week because it's Holy Week. So it's probably already been held. But promoting, staff to get involved in things like that, and then just finally a good work environment. The office that you're working in, the people that you're working with. It's not just what the office looks like, but the culture that you're working in as well.
Great lessons, because I think at the end of the day, that continued development of people is critical. And I think, Jamie, you mentioned it right at the start as a part of this conversation was communication. So communicate with them, be open, be upfront with them. Where would they like to be? Where would you like to take them? But I think in that continued development, we tend to focus a little bit more on the technical side than the other non-technical side as well. And I've done a lot of work in that non-technical side and still do it today. And Rich, you mentioned it before with that mental wellness coming into play. I know nearly every company now needs to think about that and be prepared for that, whether or not employees can sometimes use that again, because it's an easy one out. It's an easy out for some people. But I suppose if you're creating a good culture and a great culture, well, then hopefully they don't use that as an out. They're more open and honest with you about how they feel. I know firms here, well, firms in Australia that I know, they even have counsellors and psychologists on tap. So if people are into, if they've got into that space, they offer that as a service to their people, which is, I think, is outstanding. So the ability to continue to grow that, it's endless, I believe, as well, because then you can, again, retain good people. Rich, I know, again, you spoke about managed IT services before. There's, some industry standards and managed IT services that you need to be aware of. It's a part of, obviously, the current day business. As a remote workforce, is that something that you continue to stay on top of? And you mentioned something before about that. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Look, and I also had a look at the list of attendees. Most of our guests today are accountants, so it's probably the area that I can speak in. But it's not only the legal and regulatory framework and standards relating to information security, but there are ethical standards relating to it as part of the accounting profession as well. And a lot of people may not know, but there's actually an accounting ethical standard, APS GN30, which is a guidance note on outsourced services. Now, while that doesn't just cover overseas outsourced services, it covers outsourced services in general. And that within that then deals with the code of ethics, which is another standard within the accounting ethical standards, and also deals with quality of work. So, if you are an accountant working in an outsourced space, whether that be something outsourced in Australia, such as bookkeeping or something like that, or whether it's an outsourced person overseas, such as with Profit Master in the Philippines, there are things that you need to be aware of in terms of the ethical standards of the accounting profession. I can mention APS 30, APS 305 and APS 301, I think are the ones that I just referred to, if anybody's taking a note about that. The other thing, of course, is the information security standards, ISO 27001. There are 5 or 6 fundamental items within that framework. You should be aware of those, and I am aware of them, but I can't quote them off the top of my head. Maybe Jamie can. But there are 5 fundamental issues that have to be dealt with, all the way from your due diligence at the start to contingency planning at the end. And these are issues, and I mean, I've seen, and I'm sure Jamie has seen, outsourced providers overseas who've ultimately failed. And, you know, that creates a potential risk to the business onshore, not only for the accounting business, but also for the client as well. It's something very seriously is being undertaken by the provider, and it's unable to be done because of some issue with the company not being able to do it, the provider not being able to do its work. That's a very, can have a very material impact on the business. It also, things like the Privacy Act here in Australia, I don't need to talk about that. Yeah, but those are the things that that I think that we need to be aware of. It's not just as simple as saying signing on the dotted line and somebody starts work doing your bookkeeping. It's if you're serious about it, you want to be able to do it properly and make sure that you've covered your risk and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, well said. And I think those are key things if people are looking to set up that remote team, you know, not just one person, but build a team like what you guys have done, 50 in the Philippines and 30 in South Africa. You know, this is the way to grow. And if that's what you want to do, make sure that you're asking those really, really good questions. I know there's some questions coming through, guys. Just quickly, I just want to just touch on 2 things, because before we have, if you've got questions of Jamie or of Rich, please drop them into the Q&A. I know there's a couple of questions there. We're going to come to those. Before we look to wrap up, then you can maybe add this, Rich, I think you were going to mention something there. Sorry to interrupt you. Top 3 strategies to continue to focus on. So, Jamie, what's your top 3 people-led strategic items, let's call it, for you to continue to focus on?
So that is specific to PH. The task, not roles. I have to say, if we're talking specific to PH, task, not roles. Salary progression versus career progression. That'd be sort of the main 2 that come to mind.
Brilliant. And Rich?
Mate, having proper engagement with the client and the staff right from the start, and using techniques to build that engagement, developing flexibility, and I'm not really talking about work from home, I'm talking in general, a flexibility within the workplace, and developing a culture that people want to be able to come and work in and stay in.
Well said. Well said. Let's throw to questions. Let's go through some questions. If you've got them, please drop them into the Q&A. James, always great to have you on here, mate. You're always asking good questions. I like that. So, Jansz, I'll throw this at you. How do you balance the needs of your business, profitability, efficiency, etc., versus the career path requirements of the offshore individual when setting up offshore? Example, bottom 20% mundane task versus retaining the employee long-term. Sometimes it feels like these might be direct conflict with each other. Hopefully I've asked that.
I suspect, look, I'll be honest, in our experience, it's been less about the task and more about the package. And yep, so that's you know, as Australians, there's generally a sort of more a need for progress. As long as the salary's progressing, the tasks don't matter as much. And that may be a little, and look, there's exceptions to these rules, and let me preface everything with that. It's, you know, generalizing's, you can't generalize like that, but that's our experience in PH. It's not as much about, I want to be doing something way more fascinating. I just want to make sure that I know where my package is going and where my benefits, all the things that Richard mentioned, is not just about salary, but what I get out of my role. That matters more to me than what I'm actually doing on a daily basis.
Okay. Rich, anything you want to add?
No, I'd agree with that. Yeah, it's Having said that, within the amongst our accountants, they are looking to grow. So we've had young accountants coming in at the graduate level. They've moved into intermediates, seniors. We've actually had 3 staff emerge as supervisors, and they do want to see career progression, but I particularly see that amongst accountants.
Brilliant. Well said, guys. Gentlemen, thank you. We've just clicked over to 2:01 p.m. Melbourne time. Thank God we all come into a different time zone in a couple of weeks where Brisbane, you guys come in line with us, which is great because it does throw out our calendars. But guys, thank you. Any final comments from each of you?
I have just got one question to throw back to Jamie, because there's a legislation coming in that deals directly with information security, and I just can't remember the name of it. Jonathan talked about it at the conference. It's S8 or something. It's something like that, Jamie?
The Essential 8. Yeah, it's a bunch of guidelines that the ACSC has released. If you Google Essential 8 cybersecurity, it's a list of things. It tends to be more enterprise than SMB. There's some sort of more SMB focused security measures out there that are a little bit more relevant.
Brilliant.
Yep.
The Essential 8, that's exactly right. We spoke about it at the conference last year, didn't we? It's coming to play from 1 July from what I know. So yeah, do a Google search and make sure you're on top of that. Gentlemen, thank you.
The conference again this year, Paul.
What was that, Rich?
Maybe we could raise this again at the conference this year.
Yes, very true. Very true. I think you've locked in your dates. Have you locked in your dates?
11th to 13th in September. That'll be in Clark.
Beautiful. So back to the Philippines, back to Clark for a visit to, which is brilliant. So 11 to 13 September. To all of you that have joined us, thank you very much. We've just gone over a bit over an hour, but hopefully there's so many little takeaways, I think both that Jamie and Richard shared, that you can take away and say, right, how do I add that to my current business model and my future? How am I going to lead my growth of my company with people? And I think there was some absolutely golden nuggets in there. So I hope you enjoyed this. Just to mention my next masterclass, it's on the 10th of April. I've got a brilliant guest. He's a coach, he's an entrepreneur as well in the creative space. And we're going to be talking about how creative, or let's call it creativity, unlocks value. And Wayne Kingsley, he's very, very good. Wade, he's been on TEDx. He's done a lot of different talks. He's absolutely brilliant. So if you haven't seen an invitation for that, please make sure you look out for it. He's on the 10th of April from 12 p.m. And that's Eastern time, because we're all back on the same time zone, which is brilliant.
Yeah.
I think it's on the 7th of April, so that's good. Again, to Rich and to Jamie, thank you again. Thanks for joining us today. And until I speak to you guys next, signing off till I see you next.